Hello and welcome to Clay to Canopy, the show where I attempt to make just about everything from the ground up.
And welcome to the So Not Walden series. Today, we are taking a closer look at finishes. So come on, let's do this. Hello, y'all. I just want to touch a little bit on the difference between a water-based stain versus an oil-based stain. Now, there are a lot of these products out there on the market that are claiming they are a water-based stain, and honestly, let's call it what it is. If it is water-based, it is probably not at all a stain. It is actually a paint that is trying to call itself a stain. And the difference is that a paint is going to be something that creates a layer that sort of floats on top of the wood grain versus an oil-based stain that is going to penetrate the grain. It is going to go deep within that grain and really absorb and soak into it and give it a protective coating. So that is primarily what I'm experimenting with here today. I'm going to be making up some tiles using stains that I like to use, this Varathane brand. I use usually ebony, sun bleach, weathered grays, and a cognac. And I will be finishing half of them with water-based polyurethane and a oil-based teak oil and wax, just to get an idea of what the two different finishes look like. Now, there are cases where I have used this paint disguised as a stain, especially in this So Not Walden series. The white finish on my legs, this whitewash look that's going on. This is kind of how I got into this. I was looking for a stain that would give me this bright white, and the sun bleach was just not doing it for me. Varathane also carries an antique white, but it's still not white because it is a stain where it's going to interact with the tannins, penetrate through the wood, draw out the naturalness within the wood structure and the wood grain, and that automatically has a yellowing effect. In order to get that bright white, I had to use this Bear product, which was a stain, a poly, but it was water-based. And that is when I discovered it is in fact actually a paint and not a stain. So I did purchase redder tones, I'm not even sure what they call it, in the poly stain, just because I wanted to try it and really compare what a red supposed stain would look like versus an oil-based stain. Needless to say, I am not anti this product. It's more about knowing what you're getting and what you're paying for. Anyhow, let's dive into this a little bit more.
I think it's important as a consumer to understand what you're purchasing. If you are purchasing a refinished product, are you purchasing something that has been given a traditional furniture finish with oils versus purchasing a piece of furniture that is being used with a water-based finish? They've not taken steps to make sure that the wood itself was going to be rehydrated, that the life of that wood was prolonged. They've not used a product that's going to strengthen the grain and strengthen the wood for longer term. Especially if this is a refinish on an antique product, you want to make sure that what you're purchasing is going to be worth your while. It's wonderful that we're buying these reclaimed products, things that are being saved from trash, but there's a reason why oil stains are traditionally done for furniture, why it's been done for years. The oil is what replaces the rosin, the natural bits of the wood, and I keep hearing all of these refinishers say, oh, I have to seal this with shellac so the tannins don't come through. Wood tannins are the way of the wood trying to rehydrate itself. If you're not properly giving it the food it needs to fix that finish before you go ahead and apply something, all you're doing is basically sealing off the pores of that wood, sealing off the dryness, and eventually over time that finish may look okay for now, but it's going to break down and that wood is going to become more brittle much sooner than it would have if it was treated with an oil that is designed to go back into the pores, flood what it needs to, rehydrate itself, and really harden and strengthen the wood. That's not to say that you can't buy a piece that has a water-based polyurethane applied after the fact, which is something I'm going to be doing with these steps. So it is okay to go ahead and apply that polyurethane that is water-based on top of the oil once the oil has fully cured. And I think the reason why a lot of these refinishers are opting for this water-based stain poly is time. Water-based stain, the fake stain, it dries very quickly, so they can, in a matter of a day, apply this stuff, throw on the water-based finish, call it a day, and their turnover rate becomes really, really quick. You need to understand that you're paying for a product that maybe is not going to last as long when it has that finish. So that's a question you want to ask. You know, what products are you using when you applied? Or if you are a furniture finisher or just learning to get into it, maybe you don't know these things. I am all for like learning as I go. This is kind of a big thing with what my channel has been. There are a lot of processes that I have no idea, and I am just like trying to make it up as I go. I totally support that. I get that. It's a learning experience, and I just want to share this part of this knowledge, which I learned because I went to a furniture school. Proper finishes can really make or break a piece. So just my 2 cents on what I've discovered about this water-based stain. In my world, I'm calling this an imposter. I accept the fact that if I use oils, I am going to need to wait a longer period of time for the oil to fully set in before I can go ahead and put a polyurethane on top of it. I accept that because I don't want to put a product out into the world that I've spent so much time caring for and then just throwing on something that is going to, you know, essentially diminish that product later on. I want to make heirloom quality pieces. Y'all, I'm just butting in here really quick. When I talk about heirloom quality finishes, I'm not referencing the things I make out of pine. I'm talking about this new venture, taking old pieces of furniture made out of domestic hardwoods like maple, walnut, mahogany, oak, and restoring those woods to an heirloom quality finish. And if I'm building something out of pine, it is probably because I wanted to use some 2x4s. And in that case, I already know the quality of the lumber is just kind of so-so, and pine, it takes forever and ever and ever to dry out, especially the 2x4s you're going to buy at Home Depot. They're probably not even kiln dried unless you buy the more expensive ones. So the stuff that I've been making here on the Not So Walden series that has been made out of pine, I'm not worried about it drying out and cracking, and I am okay with using the paint, the faux poly stain that is actually a paint on the pine bits, because that pine is not going to dry out anytime soon. Whereas things that have been around a while that are dry and are cracked and have been thrown out for that reason, those are the things that I want to make sure that I'm putting an oil-based stain or an oil-based treatment on so that they can prolong the life of those pieces and really pay honor and homage to them and bring back this heirloom quality idea to them. Anyhow, let's get into some staining. So I have a stack of samples that I'm going to be applying this first stain to. I'm going to be using this Varathane Cognac for this round of samples. And for the application of this, you can either brush it on or just use a rag to sort of wipe it on. And then after you let it soak into the wood grain, you wipe off the excess. That is how this Varathane wood stain, which is an oil-based stain, works. So I'm going to go ahead and apply this, and I will use just the brush, I guess, for these. And this one is mahogany veneer that I'm applying this cognac stain to. And I want you to make note of, as I am applying this stain, I'm going across the grain because this is Varathane oil-based stain. As I apply this, I'm going across the grain because I want it to fully soak into that grain, into those pores. That's the point of this stain. This is going to matter in a minute when I switch to showing you my applying the imposter stain. So I'm going to go ahead and let that sit there. And then I usually, if this is a larger piece of furniture, I'll do maybe half of it and then go back to do the wipe off. Since these are small tiles, I'm just going to go to the end because by the time I get to the end, it should have soaked in enough for me to do the first wipe off. And I like a good 2 coats to make sure that I get everything in there. I will do this initial that you're seeing me do right now on a large piece of furniture. I will do the whole wipe it all down, and then I will give it a couple days, like a day or two, to set in after it's had its initial wipe down to dry, and then I'll come back and give it its second coat. Sometimes, if it's great weather, I can get away with doing it later in the afternoon or very early the next day as the second coat. I know that directions say it only needs 1 hour, but I find that with an oil, I get better results when I let it do its thing overnight, let it soak in, and then I can come back at it with another round. All right, I got all of them coated, and now I'm gonna go back to that first one. My weather here right now is about 50 degrees, high 50s maybe, and Nighttime is in its 30s, and right now it's super foggy and kind of drizzly. That matters. In situations like this, you'll want to give it a little bit more time before you do the wipe off. You want to make sure you get some decent penetration before you do your wiping. Go ahead, and it may not give you full coverage. That's the point of going back in with a second coat. You may not get as dark of the color that you want, but you want to do that wipe off. And now this has got to set up and do its thing. So in this case, like I said, we're going to let it rest overnight, and I can come back to it and give it its second coat. The only reason why I'm saying overnight right now is because, again, I have this funky weather. I have this tile here, and I'm going to apply this Bombay Mahogany. This is a water-based stain poly. I wanted to make note that when I applied that stain, I went across the grain because a stain is penetrating into the wood grain, really soaking up into the pores. It sucks in the oil and hardens within the grain, making the wood stronger, also keeping it hydrated so that you don't have drying and cracking. This product says it's a stain and poly, but it is water-based. Anytime you have a water-based something, water-based really raises the grain of the wood. If this product claims that it is both water-based and it does not raise the grain, then it is not a stain. It is basically a paint, because a stain would penetrate the grain and suck into it, and if it is water-based and it is doing that action, the grain is automatically going to be raised because that's what water does. This is why I keep calling it an imposter, because I do not believe that this is truly a stain. I believe this is basically watered down paint. What same properties you're going to find in your latex paints, your acrylic paints. I'm going to intentionally apply this across the grain the same way I did, and you'll see the properties for sure over what it means to be a paint versus a stain. And if I apply this on in this method, if you read the directions tell you to go with the grain, not across the grain, sort of at a diagonal for the second coat to clean it up. Because what's happening is you're creating the grain because it's a paint. So when you go and you cover up all of these spots, you let it soak in, and it says make sure it stays wet, and then come back at it with your brush at a slight side angle. Except when I did that with the white version of this, it literally just became a streaky mess. I also used some of this to apply to a table that I was trying to put a finish on, and I had the same results. It applied like a paint, not a stain. So I'm working on this table. The areas that you see around this edge where it seems almost a little bit splotchy, not really with the grain, or not really just showing the true grain, as it were. That is the application of that bare stuff that is claiming to be a stain. Essentially, it's a paint. It's floating on the top of the surface. It's not actually doing any kind of penetration into the grain, working with the grain. It's in fact covering up the grain. And the only way that it makes it look like, grain-esque is the application method of brushing it on following the grain. If you can see this little area right here, the grain is actually floating this way, kind of feathered in this direction, and the supposed stain is actually running in this other direction. Because when I did the wipe off, I wiped what I thought was with the grain, but unless you're sitting here on it and really following every bit of the grain, it's kind of just mimicking grain, because it's essentially floating on top of the grain and not actually penetrating with it and working with it. Now, these other areas where you can see where it's full color and it's seeped in, right here is a good place where I had sand back some of that paint. I didn't want to do a full, complete takedown. I just took down enough to where I could sort of even things out and it wouldn't look too bad. But here, you'll see where I applied a coat of real stain on top of it, and it did penetrate. So you can see that beautiful grain still there, the weird falseness of that fake imposter stain that is not really a stain. Personally, going forward, and I'm going to stick with an oil stain, and I'm going to forego the seal it before you apply this supposed stain so that this faux stain can float on top paint stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and do this, and I'm wiping it on the diagonal like the instructions say. And rather than getting something that when you see the two-tone with the grain, your streaks and your brush strokes, your faux grain is only happening with the wiping away process. So you can see this unevenness versus one of the same pieces. You can see it's splotchy. When you have splotchiness and it's splotchy in an area that would not have grain, there's an issue. When I first started out, I used to use a lot of products that would do stuff like this. You never quite got the proper penetration, the proper finish, the way you would with something like this. These are cut from the same pieces of wood. I shouldn't have these drastically different finishes. These stain samples have been drying for well over 2 weeks, and I'm going to do one half with the water-based polyurethane, and then I will do the other half with an oil-based so we can see the difference of the two. The water-based poly, some of the benefits are that it dries much faster, it is easy water cleanup, it is better for the environment in terms of disposal. The used material like the cans and stuff. Oh, and also, I'm not feeling well, it dries crystal clear. Whereas the oil tends to leave a little bit of yellowing. I'm applying the water-based first because the water-based is not a penetrating finish. It's gonna float on the top and it's gonna just kind of sit there. I want to get that protective coating on top before I put the oil, which is the penetrating thing. In terms of the top coat, or your polyurethane, I have used both the oil and water-based for different reasons. Like I said, the water-based, it doesn't yellow. So there have been cases where I've made pieces that had exotic woods and I did not want to alter the brightness of the different exotic woods. This is way back when. In the future, I'm going to probably be using the spray gun to apply this finish. But today, just for the sake of these samples, I'm just going to brush him on, and I'm going to hope that I do not regret my decision to just brush. I have usually applied this with a foam brush. A foam roller. The foam roller gets rid of any of the bubbles. I think I'm going to go back over it with the foam roller after I see what happens here. This is the reason why you spray, but these are such small little things, and I am not feeling well, and the thought of cleaning up the entire sprayer is not appealing to me right now. Try this, have a foam brush. Alright, I've gone ahead and sanded. After the second coat, I sanded with 220 and then went back in with one last coat of the water-based poly. I'm now going to move on to doing the second half of these pieces, doing the oil finish on the other half. When I'm doing a furniture finish, my order is usually to sand the raw wood all the way up to 220. Then I will give it 2 coats of stain, wait till it dries, especially if it's oil, give it another 220 sand, go in with another 2, usually about 2 coats of that stain, depending on how dark and rich I want it to be. And then I will follow that all up with steel wool before going in with my teak oil or my polyurethane, whatever the top coat is. Since these are just samples, I did only do the 2 coats of oil and then went right into the top coat. But normally I would add in that extra round of sanding, steel wooling before applying the top coat. And then after all of this is done, after the main top coat goes on, I will follow it up with some wax. Alright, so for oil, you want to do a brush on, wipe off technique. At least that's what I normally like to do, where I will brush on the oil and then have a rag to wipe off the excess. I am not 100%, and doing anything right now has been incredibly laborious. I will be giving all the oil stuff to at least 2 coats. We'll see where we get after 2 coats. Sometimes, you wait a week after the second coat, let it dry, and then come back and hit it again with another 2 coats. Because this is oil, it is penetrating into the wood, which is what you want. The same as the oil-based stains. This is just another layer of that protection, gonna harden into that wood. One downfall to the oil, at least this teak oil, it's not as water resistant, so I wouldn't use it for a tabletop. But this is perfect for your chairs, for any of your dressers, anything that's not going to be in direct contact with moisture on a regular basis. Like, you're not going to put cups on your dresser. You might have any makeups or perfumes or things, but you're not going to be eating on your dresser per se. Most people don't. Some people do, I don't know.
That's not to say that it's not going to be protected. It's just that you may, over time, get like the water ringlets, so you'd want to use a coaster if you're using the oil. But I do love the look of the traditional oil to the piece, and then of course you can always add the wax and add even a layer of the polyurethane on top of the teak afterwards, just to give it that little bit of extra strength. I'm going to give these the maximum amount of time I can to soak in, which is why I'm going to do all the samples before I start my wipe off process. The other great thing about applying oil is you do not need to worry about the dust. With the polyurethane, any dust that gets stuck to the piece is going to harden in the poly. With the oil, you don't have to worry about that. I've given these samples, I want to say 4 coats of the teak oil. And basically, I was waiting till I got to the point where the teak oil sheen was just as much as the polyurethane. And I could go again. Sometimes I will. If I want a higher sheen, I will go ahead and keep applying. For the wax, I am using, I love this, citrus sealed. This is Howard's Premium Paste Wax. It's the natural. This is a good thing to do to your furniture, even if it's, you know, furniture you've had for a long time. Give it a good clean with some furniture cleaner like Pledge or something. And then come in and wax your pieces. This should be done periodically just to protect the surface of your pieces depending on how much wear and tear your pieces have. Polyurethane is prone to trapping dust. Even though it looks like a nice finish, you can still see little bits of things that have stuck to the surface. Of course, I did not use the pop-up tent. If I had used the pop-up tent, I would have reduced all of that dust. We had Santa Ana winds and crap being blown all over the place. But my point is, if you don't have a big setup, the teak oil, you don't have to worry about dust. Just something to keep in mind. So I'm going to go ahead and apply this wax. The wax also adds an extra layer of protection, and I'm actually going to apply the wax to both sides just to be fair. This is an old towel rag that I use that has been saturated in the wax that I just keep using to apply. This is not unlike waxing a car. You can put it on in circles or however, whatever technique you like to use, and then you give it a minute, and then you come in with a clean rag and you want to buff it. So I'm going to be buffing this wax off. And the beauty of the wax is it protects your table or your piece of furniture, whatever it is, chair, whatever you're doing. It protects the furniture from the oils and fingerprints to help prolong the finish, make the finish last longer. It also will shine the table, give it a bit of a shine. Oftentimes like to put this in the sun just to give it a good heat up and cure on the surface, only half hour-ish, and then come back with the rag again and continue the buffing. But it's a very easy process. Alright y'all, that is going to be it for this stains video. I hope you enjoyed taking a closer look at this part of the process. Please like, share, and subscribe if you have not done so already, and stick around to watch this environment all come together.